I have intense beef against Mr. Popcorn himself. Give me a second to find my beef and slash. Oh, okay. I found it. Okay, cool. I just dropped it, not in announcements. Where should I drop it? Should I drop it into general of Tomfoolery's Discord? That's where I'll drop it. I don't know if I'm able to drop things into your chat, Jolah. If I am, I'll drop it there also.
No, it won't let you do that. YouTube is
Okay,
very protective.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, I just dropped it. Okay, that's totally valid. I just dropped it in general, so if you can pull it up, then you'll see it. But what you said is there's this economics guy, this communist who's like, economics exam in college be like, what is the best and most superior system, capitalism versus socialism? And then your response there was that this isn't true. Just because they want you to actually understand capitalism doesn't mean they like it. I had a Marxist professors with this mentality. Okay, I feel like this is bullshit. I feel like this is bullshit because I feel like you have to decide what you are and aren't teaching. And like the decision of what you do teach is just as important as what you don't teach.
Sure.
So like, yeah, go for it.
You go.
Yeah. Okay. So like basically my premise is like the decision to not teach certain things has the implication particularly when you're teaching kids at a low level of like, in essence, teaching them certain things. So like if I choose to teach my students exclusively a bunch of things about like supply and demand, but then I never at all talk about certain things. And I talk about supply and demand with respect to taxes from the perspective of like every tax will have an effect on both the supplier and also the demander, right? So both the consumer and also the producer. That's broadly true, but it's not true in every case. So if you don't bring up the fact that it's not true in every case, and you don't bring up specifically the example of land, for example, which has a set supply, right? You're not actually bringing up the totality of the conversation. And the fact that you're not bringing that up has implications in terms of the way you're gonna think about taxes as a member of the audience / the classroom.
So this is something that's going to come off very varied based on personal experience, of course. But from the Marxist professors I have had, so basically what the conversation would be is what you said, like simple supply and demand stuff. Let's learn some equations on how to find where the points are going to be on the graph. We're going to graph it all. We're going to find out where we're going to have the proper distribution and all that stuff. But then there would be a conversation about, okay, we need to understand capitalism. When Walmart raises their wage to a certain price, or Amazon raises their wage to a certain price, that isn't because these companies are doing something good or moral. That isn't because the economy is good. That might actually mean like the opposite, for example. So I feel like when you're talking about like tax structure and stuff, are you talking about like if a professor teaches only about supply and demand and says like the market's gonna do
when you talk about
like without the extra context of what makes the system act as it does instead of just focusing on the function.
So I mean, we're sort of getting into minutia of economics, which is fine, but like there is a premise within economics about inelasticity versus elasticity, right? And so if you don't talk enough about elasticity in the context of taxation, and the fact that certain things are strictly inelastic versus strictly elastic, right? Elastic meaning like how much of are you willing to change your price, right? Like if you don't talk about the fact that housing is strictly inelastic, not housing rather, but land exclusively is strictly inelastic. The amount of land does not change based on the cost of land, right? Then you're not going to actually think about the fact that you can tax land and it doesn't have an effect on the consumer. It only has an effect on the producer, which I'm going to put in quotations because obviously no one's actually producing it. It's just the matter of owning it, right? And so this is something that like Joseph Stiglitz has devoted his life to, right? People like Henry George have devoted their lives to. And so like this is something that does matter in the context of economics and has effects. But if you're not going to talk about it, like there are implications to what you don't talk about as well as what you do talk about. So like, even though I'm not a communist and I don't take it from a perspective of a Marxist, I do take it from a perspective of a Georgist. Like it is frustrating when they choose not to teach certain things and they do teach other things.
Hello.
Yeah, sure.
How's it going?
Hello.
What's up?
Yeah, fun economics stuff. I got attacked by Quibbles over coffee.
I had to destroy him. You know, it's very important that I destroy him. Yeah,
I forgot my. Oh yeah. One big thing that I don't like about online lefties and also people in real life is the tendency to just look at things as a big conspiracy about like why economic systems function as they do. So like for example, the idea that corporations are pretty amoral in how they act and they aren't going to be particularly evil based on, you know, they just want to do evil shit. But if the government allows them leeway to do something like use all of their excess capital from a tax cut for stock buybacks, that isn't because we should be mad at only rich people for that transaction. We should be mad at policymakers for allowing corporations to do that. Like
True.
one big thing
Like
that
when
I
Trump said that he used all sorts of tax loopholes that he would pay off politicians, like, and people would get upset about it. And he's like, "What? Like, it's allowed. If I don't do it, then I'm stupid." Like, right?
I'm just trying to sort of look at it between yeah, if I don't do it, I'm stupid. I'm trying to look at it um I used to be a big Kyle Kalinske fan. And
Oh
if you're
no.
familiar with him,
Oh,
his
I am.
entire thing is populism, big conspiracy, corporations are evil, which
Sure.
can be useful for getting people excited about politics and everything, and getting people actually out there for activism and stuff like that. But it does give you a misunderstanding of how the systems do work. Why are corporations doing stock buybacks? Why are they doing this? Why are they increasing wages for certain workers and decreasing it for others? I think understanding capitalism, I do agree though. Um, it's just the
Yeah,
context of the tweet that they literally come out and say inherently like capitalism is the only good system and everything else is terrible. I just don't agree that that is the sentiment, but I feel like they are teaching students about the system they're about to go into. And you're sort of expecting the professors to put another lean on it. That's
yeah.
like, hey,
I
look past this system.
just think it's a little frustrating if you're going to frame it in terms of like here's an example of you're only teaching one component of a broader subject, right? Now, I don't think that the like Marxism isn't taken seriously anywhere, right, in the context of economics. So like, I don't think that you have an obligation as an economics professor to teach
Sure.
Marxism. I do think you absolutely have an obligation as an economics professor to teach Joseph Stiglitz. Joseph Stiglitz is a Nobel Prize winning economist. The fact that they're not talking about the Henry George theorem is absurd. Right? If you're going to talk about like infrastructure and not talk about the Henry George theorem, like you don't know what you're talking about in terms of infrastructure. Now, in the higher level field, in the terms of like if you're getting a master's degree or a PhD or whatever the fuck it is, right? Like obviously in that context, of course, they're teaching all of economics. But the question is like when you're teaching on a tight schedule and when you're teaching with only a with a class that's only marginally interested in economics.
So do you mean for like a general course, like for
Yeah,
example, like a required course for like sophomores or
exactly.
juniors in college?
For like a gen ed requirement, the fact that most of those don't talk about externalities nearly to the degree that they should is a problem, right? Like I don't think it's good for America that we approach microeconomics without really talking about externalities.
Yeah, we get into that more with macro studies. Like micro seems like, all
But
right, let's talk
micro
about
is
just like,
yeah.
but that's what the professors end up doing in my experience. Macro typically is another stage up, another step up in the course requirements if you go deeper into the economic curriculum.
Right,
at
but it's
the
worth
school.
unpacking that. It's
And
worth
that's
unpacking that.
part of that. Yeah, I do. I agree.
Like it's
just
worth unpacking because like micro is like there's a if you only approach economics from a macroeconomics perspective, there are political implications, and if you only approach economics from a microeconomics perspective, there are also political implications. The fact that we choose to teach one of those before the other, there are political implications to the decision of which one's taught first, because in many cases it's not like both are actually being taught. It's that one is being taught and then students go off to just do their computer science degree or whatever the fuck it is.
I don't think we disagree much on the wording of that exact tweet. Can you read it one more time?
Yeah, this
What
this
they
just
said.
isn't true. Oh, what they said. Economics exams in college be like, what is the best and most superior system? Capitalism check mark, socialism X mark.
Yeah, I haven't personally heard much about socialism even brought up, and I'm guessing that's what you're saying. Like even if they aren't saying it directly, like capitalism is better, this is going to be awesome. Implicitly, if they only teach about capitalism and how like very simple market movements work, then that's going to be, and if you don't focus on
Yeah.
externalities and stuff like that, but we do talk about like duopolies and oligopolies and like all this stuff as well, and how these are corrupting influences, which leads people to the
It's just not the
conclusion-
first thing that we talk about.
Yeah.
We start
is
from like a
difficult.
perspective.
So
we
you just
start from
want
a
a more
perspective of
beginner's course that's more varied
yeah. The problem is
because
we
yeah.
start from a perspective of like the beginner's course is started with like, here we have perfect competition, which is very frequently bullshit. Here we have a system where there's no externalities, which is always bullshit. Here's an example of where market forces are actually interacting in like normal quote unquote ways. And like, I understand mathematically why it's easier to start there. But if you're going to approaching economics from a mathematical perspective is one way to teach economics. And if your goal is to go all the way up in economics, obviously you have to have that grounding. But if your goal of an economics course is rather than trying to create new economics students, rather to just have people have the grounding that's necessary for them to operate within society, I don't think that teaching the micro is necessarily the place to start unless they're trying to actually go all the way up the field.
Yeah, I do agree. The entry level course that I took at my old university, it was a combination course between a micro and macro. And every exam, the first half would be the mathematics stuff. It'd be all the equations.
Mhm.
It'd be how you arrive to all these conclusions about like the carrying capacity of like local economies or whatever. And then the second half, we had to study for one chapter, for example, the four people. It was Friedman, Hayek, Marx, and Smith. So we had those four people. We had to read their economic like theory, and we had to give our own take based off of each of their interpretations on how to solve an issue. So whether that be like carbon emissions, whether that be sewage, like if a company's externality, if there's dumping sewage and ruining the water for fish and the environment, what do we do in the scenario? Which economic system do you think could attempt to alleviate this? So I think I have had a pretty good course on that. So maybe, like I said before, maybe my personal experience gives me a little bit of like sort of a privilege because I had a good course
Mhm.
for that entry level. Like, of course, I'm going further now, but like for an entry level course, that's freaking really good, covering micro, macro, and theory all in one.
Sure.
I think that's basically what we're all looking for. I just don't like the idea from a lot of people on the left that, anybody that wants to understand, like this happens to Vosh a lot. Anybody that wants, or Socked on left, like anybody who wants to work within the current system to make things better pragmatically, that person is inherently anti-socialism, or that person is inherently pro-capitalism. Like I hear Vosh
Or a class
suggesting, like,
trader, right?
yeah. Like there's so many like
Yeah.
absolutist terms that I just want to, start avoiding, and that's why I hate tweets like that. Especially if
Yeah,
you
I
look
get
at
really upset at it too.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Like the amount of like, if you even work within the current system is that you're a class trader, that you're just serving the bourgeois or whatever. Like it's so unproductive,
Yeah, and I think that general idea is really it's not even only online because a lot of activists that I do talk to, that are younger, a lot of older activists seem to have this down. Like they have been pretty experienced and they've been through a lot of conversations and everything. But a lot of young people do have an idealistic sense of like, you know what, this needs to be absolute. If we aren't going to get Medicare for all right now, you're not a real progressive. If we're not going to get this big policy right now, you're not a real progressive. If you say, for example, we need to give tax incentives to move a corporation into, because I'm from rural America. If I have to give tax incentives for a corporation to move into my community to make our economy better, that's not a socialist thing, but that is something that would help my hometown. And I don't want to be labeled
Yeah.
as some type of traitor to my own ideology because I'm willing to take that step because we don't have money to have public systems. We don't have money to have public programs or like a local jobs program. We just don't have that money, and we're so restricted from a local perspective. And a lot of progressives, I feel like, have more of a national political sense. So it's like it's okay to talk about Medicare for all and all this big stuff at the national sense, but we have to pay for what we do at these levels. So we might have to take a couple L's on ideological policies and stuff. So that's one of my biggest gripes with that. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. I mean, like, you're definitely right that there are a lot of people on the left, and I'll take it at face value. I didn't read through the entire context of the first person who tweeted it. I'll take it on face value that that's an example of a person who like was saying some dumb shit. I just don't think that the particular framework of like should economics be taught differently. I don't think that like okay, so in the context of politics, right? You're saying that like we need to work within systems within politics. We need to make sure that the politics is being changed, that we have to operate blah 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 blah. Valid. I similarly think that in the context of academia, you should try to get as much education as you possibly can, right? And some of the education you're going to get is going to be pro-left. Some of the educations you get, I have education. I don't know if you know him, but Richard Grinnell. He was the director of national intelligence under Trump. He works at my university. I've worked with a bunch of people who are very, very far right on foreign policy, and it's definitely helped me to learn about foreign policy, even though obviously I disagree with them ultimately. I don't think that it's crazy to learn from people who are dramatically distinct from you. However, I do think it's still reasonable to criticize like the framework by which those things are necessary and the framework of academia as being broadly right wing. I think that you have to operate within the context of media, right? But I think it's reasonable to say the framework of media is like problematic in X, Y, and Z context, even though you should still operate within the context of it.
Yeah, I agree. Just on a personal level, do you okay? This isn't really a personal level, but like in general, where can we hit these points to open up people's minds to it? Because like as we were saying, like courses in university, that's not going to be the best place for everybody to have their minds open. A lot of these courses are going to be pretty general. It's not really going to have that much of an ideological slant. You're not going to have somebody who's like a far right, I don't know, whatever whatever ideological set you want to go off of. You're not going to have them come up and say socialism sucks outwardly in college. Typically, it might be implicit, and hopefully people in the class push back. And you're not going to have anybody who's a Marxist come out and say like outright, this is what we should be doing to our political system. We need to have a revolution and revolutionize how we're doing capitalism right now. So I feel like a lot of this happens outside of the classroom. And then when you get inside the classroom, it's up to students to contextualize what they're learning in the proper light. And I'm really just thinking about like how, because I'm a junior right now, and I'll be doing like 5 years total because I'm doing like a master's public policy degree. So like in my college community, I'm not completely sure how to open people's minds to these ideas because people usually do take it as, capitalism is how it is. It can't change. This is going to be how it is. Sorry. I like Bernie a little bit. His healthcare plan seems cool, but I don't really know what that means. And yeah, after school, when I'm older, when I'm paying taxes, I'm just going to give up on this dream. So like, I'm not sure how to make people contextualize it in the proper way, but.
Did you guys watch the modern monetary theory debate with who was it, Destiny?
I want to listen. The audio quality is just so bad from that the boomer audio quality.
The boomer,
I pulled it up on the.
That's the
on
worst,
screen
honestly.
for a little bit. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I've got headphones on. Sorry, guys, this isn't happening.
Yeah, Rage Pope's
exactly.
mic is so clear, and then he starts talking, and he's like, "Hello, I can't hear you."
No. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, okay.
it's just so bad, so bad. It's
If
like one
you're-
thing that's unforgivable is the audio.
Yeah. So Joel, if you're framing like how do we get people to be actively involved citizens, I agree with you that doesn't ultimately happen in the classroom. It has to happen outside of the classroom. But there's sort of two different we have to think about in the context of politics. One is the context of like how do we get people to like join campaigns? How do we get people to like become like genuinely active participants in politics? But there's a sort of a second level, which is how do we just get like rank and file voters to vote the way that we want them to vote? And in terms of the second category of like the rank and file voters, I think that there is a sense in which the fact that we teach micro in the way that we do, broadly speaking, I'm glad that you had the experience that you did, but broadly speaking, we do teach micro first and then we teach macro. The fact that we teach it in that way, I do think has implications in terms of the way that we're teaching people who are not that invested in economics and not that invested in politics to think about politics.
One area that I think does this very well, where students who aren't even involved with the course work typically get something out of the class. One area is actually that I've seen personally with people who really don't care about these issues, but is like sociology courses.
Yep.
Because you really do go through it in a way where it connects personally. It shows people, it gives people a foundation of thought that they can grow in their daily lives with. I'm somebody who speaks out against basic corporate what is it called, sensitivity training for like racial sensitivity training, because the studies say it doesn't work, and I think people need a true understanding of how systems affect people to really be empathetic. And I don't want people just walking around being scared to make microaggressions. I want people to truly understand what's wrong with their systems, and I think sociology courses do that. Which is why I get into this is a little bit of a side discussion, but in America, how much it costs for university. A lot of people say, why do I have to take sociology and why do I have to take all these gen eds and whatever? And I sort of agree if you're going for engineering. It sucks that you have to pay so much money. If you're poor, like going into engineering, you have to pay so much money and then you have to take a bunch of courses that have nothing to do with your major. But these courses really are so beneficial to growing people's overall thought. And I wish something like that could be incorporated into economics courses where it's like, let's focus on if you're a university in the middle of Pennsylvania or in the Rust Belt. Let's focus on economics and how this has affected this area directly. Which trade deals affected which communities in which way, and what factories left, or like which companies got ran out of town by Amazon and Walmart. What kind of work replaced it? Why did it replace it? Like, why did all these functions happen? So that when these people move on in their lives and they see a business, I don't know, fall apart, go out of town, or when they see a trade deal mentioned, then it might connect in their heads. Like when I vote this election, I sort of remember back in college when this was a big topic, and I actually know how these systems affect things. This person's speaking to issues that I know more personally. I feel like that personal connection is really important, and you're not going to get that in macro whatsoever, or micro. I mean, you're not going to get that in micro whatsoever. Macro, maybe, depending on who's teaching it, but you really need to go into economic theory, I think, to get like other people actually. The way you tackle economic systems in literature is so much different, of course, from like a data set. And I really wish there were more courses like that, like a sociological approach to it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, so, 1619 Project is another example of a similar sort of issue, right? Like, we talk about history from a perspective mostly male, mostly white of the United States, which is like, those are important historic figures. I'm not going to like dispute the value of talking about any number of people who we talk about, but like, there is a sense in which like we have to figure out how we're ranking these things. And given in an idealized system, we would all know about all of the people who matter in history. We would all know about all of the people, all of the context that's important in economics. We would know about blah, 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 everything, right? But like, there is a sense in which we have to rank, and I think that the ranking that we've been doing currently isn't particularly geared towards people who are going to only get a bit of information. We're ranking in a context like I started in architecture. I started my college stuff in architecture, and the first thing that they teach you in architecture is basically how to do CAD, like computer assisted drawing, right? Which is like completely irrelevant to me now that I'm no longer an architecture student. Now, if I stayed in architecture, it would be relevant. I would continue to be going on and in that field, and therefore it would be important to have that context in order to do other things. But if your goal is to think about architecture, not in terms of like it's a major, you're going to go off and work in that profession, but rather as like a framework of how you're going to think about like broader conceptions of how you operate in the world, you probably should start with urban planning. You probably should start with zoning. You probably should start with like public policy issues. You should also be starting with artistic contexts, right? Like all of that is important framework for every single student. And the reality is that in a lot of schools, a huge proportion of kids who start in economics or start in architecture or start in any number of fields aren't going to stay there in perpetuity. And so I think that the framework is broken because we're just not appreciating the fact that people aren't staying in the fields that they think they're in.
Yeah, and how you start off the education, like you just said, if you're going to go through the analytical way that you actually come to certain conclusions in economics, and you're not going to go through, like I was saying before, the overall layout of how the systems play out, then you're not going to get the same connection to it. And and like you said, if you would have left architecture after taking a different course, you might actually have something that resonates still to this day. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, some of my classes were extremely helpful. So like, I think that I took a really interesting public policy classes, right? And I think that has a huge effect now that I'm in like public policy context in the political sphere. There are a lot of kids who like moved over to drama or moved over to art or whatever it was. And the drawing foundations were really important to them. I don't think that there's anyone in economics. I should reframe that actually. I don't think there's anyone who is not in economics, who is going to be affected by a better understanding of micro or macro economics, that unless they're staying in that field. Whereas I think that every single one of us is going to be dramatically benefited by having a better like baseline information of how these systems operate at a sort of conceptual level beyond just like the base level like mathematical work of it.
Yeah, and giving people that foundation does help. I actually know a couple people who are college dropouts, and they started their own like independent media thing. And I interviewed them. This is like a local, just an independent news person. They just
Nice. That's
started
awesome.
a Facebook page. They hear sirens going off. They get in their car. They live stream it, and they drive to wherever a car crashes or whatever. And I interviewed this person, and I was really surprised that they had such a deep understanding of how systemic racism works. And I'm like, wait, you're from a really rural area. You're white. You do this for a job. You dropped out of college, and you have this understanding that nobody else around here has for some reason. And he reveals later, like, yeah, before I dropped out of college, I took a sociology course. And I'm like, of course. He took one sociology course, and I think he read The New Jim Crow once. And that was enough to give him the foundation. So when he sees something on the TV trying to villainize black people, saying, hey, black people are just more likely to commit crimes, he knows. He saw the facts about it. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, so